Welcome to the Seattle Real Estate with Urban Ash, your go-to podcast for all things Seattle and Seattle real estate. Whether you're a first-time homebuyer, an experienced investor, downtown resident, or simply just curious about the latest market trends, we've got you covered. I'm Urban Ash, a 20-plus year downtown resident and real estate professional. Together, we'll uncover insider tips, share expert insights to help you navigate the market, and showcase community leaders and organizations. So join me as we dive into everything from the rental and sales market to the rich community life that makes Seattle so unique. Thank you, Isaac, for joining today. We have a long history of working together throughout the years. I'm sure that will come out in this conversation, but I've always enjoyed and loved working with you and seeing the things that you've done professionally, but also now moving into kind of the real estate space, specifically in Dallas. And you kind of ventured off on your own. You were pretty heavy investing in Seattle with rental properties, and you took that kind of plunge to diversify yourself and take your money from the Seattle market and just kind of, go into a different markets that maybe you weren't as familiar, but you did your own homework, you're building your portfolio, and now you're helping others step into the market too. And, I think that's just so amazing. Sat down with you this last fall and kind of heard everything that you're doing from, the soups and nuts to now your business that you're doing down there. You have your license now, don't you?
I do. Yep.
Yeah.
Texas, proud Texas license owner.
Sweet. Sweet.
Yeah.
And so, just wanted to kind of talk to you, it's over the years too, and more recently, I've had a lot of clients just ask about different markets. And of course, I'm in Arizona, so I have that market to speak of, a little bit of Oregon, and of course, Washington on both the eastern side and western side, obviously. But it's always interesting to hear what other markets are doing. And I want to be able to, speak articulately to my clients who are also asking about different opportunities. And so that's what brought us together today. So do you want to just kind of dive into a little bit of maybe how you got into, where you're at?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So first of all, thanks for the intro. So Ash, you and I think have known each other over 10 years now. We first met when I was leasing an apartment in Escala, and I was like, this is the person I want to work with. So ever since then, I think you've represented me in multiple deals, including my primary home, but several investment properties here in Seattle. And really, you were, my first step into real estate investment, which I really appreciate, because obviously you have so much knowledge about the Seattle market, now other markets, but back 10 years ago, it was mainly Seattle. And it was just a really great start to this journey. So just a little bit about me. I moved to Seattle from Dallas, Texas. I don't know if I've ever told you that, but I used to live in that market. So that's sort of how I know of it and about it and the lay of the land. Now, granted, I've only lived there for 3-4 years, but that's how I got to know Dallas, Texas. And I moved here to Seattle about 15 years ago to work in tech. So I started off with Expedia. I then worked at Amazon for 6 years. I then worked at Microsoft. And throughout these years, I felt like my soul was slowly dying. It's great. It helped us fulfill a lot of our financial dreams and, helped me obviously build my investment portfolio. But I seriously, like, corporate America for me has been a slow grind. And I was trying to figure out, how do I get out of that, right? Like, how do I build a future where I have passive income and I actually don't have to be at the mercy of these large tech companies? And granted, there's a lot of really good things about them. I don't mean to dismiss it. It's just more for me personally. It's not the life that I aspire to, especially pre-COVID. Amazon was like brutal, as everyone can remember and know. And so I purchased my first property in Seattle with you. It was a 1-bedroom condo in Capitol Hill. And then we quickly bought another one, West Seattle. And to your point, I started thinking, how do I diversify? And I got to know this lady who was a friend of my sister's, and she hooked me up with this agent in Texas, in Dallas, because she was investing in Dallas. She had about 10 properties there. And specifically through what's called the Dallas Housing Authority, or the local Section 8 program there. And at the time, and which is still true, the ratio between property values over in Dallas and the average market rent was pretty favorable. But then when you started renting out those places through the Section 8 program, the returns have become a lot better, because by definition and officially, they pay between 10 and 15% above market rents. But in reality and in my experience, this has been a lot more significant. So I've seen rents upwards of 30, 40, and even 50% of average market rents coming in through what's called the HCV, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is the local Section 8 program there. Now, then COVID hit. And then I think you and I were both exposed to some of the COVID regulations here in Seattle, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But essentially, one of my tenants lost her job,
Mhm.
and basically, based on the local regulations, was getting leniency with her rent. Basically, was told you don't really have to pay rent anymore, or you can delay your rent payment and all that. And we won't get into all of what happened with COVID, but then also City of Seattle started implementing rental registration programs as well. If you recall, right around that time, maybe a little bit before COVID. And all of a sudden, I started getting my homes inspected. They were passing its inspection, but that was several $100s a year, also on top of the already diminished returns that I was getting there. And so, just to play with numbers a little bit, you and I purchased a beautiful West Seattle townhouse, and that was about $700,000. And I was renting it out for $3,000 at the time. So clearly not a cash flow play. And then when I went over to Dallas, I was able to purchase three homes for $250,000 each one producing $3,000 in rent per month. So then, quite back of the envelope, easy math over there. You're getting 2.5 to 3x returns on the cash flow that you would with Seattle. So that's sort of, I was like, oh, shoot, this is really amazing. And this program is scalable and can produce a really good monthly cash flow on a regular basis. And so I started building my portfolio there. I'm up to 5 properties in Dallas, but I also started investing in other states like Tennessee and Missouri, where I hold investment properties. And so, sorry, to wrap up my very long intro, and I'm sorry about that. I got to a point where I was able to quit my corporate job and live mostly off of the passive income that these properties produce. Of course, I was lucky enough to obtain some mortgages at 3 and 4%. So, that's good. But rates will come down in the future. And so that's kind of like the variable that you can play with. And decided to help others locate and purchase their own investment properties in Dallas, and specifically leveraging the Section 8 program. So I built a local team there. I became a licensed agent, but I partner with a local agent there who goes and actually sees the houses. I partner with a property management team over there as well that takes care of my property. So when I introduce people to that company, I know that they're going to take good care of those houses because they take care of my houses as well. And make partnerships with our beloved Carice, who does mortgages over there as well as insurance agents. So essentially, I started the company by the name of SolMidas, Sol for sun, Midas for the touch of gold. And ideally, it's to provide an end-to-end white glove experience for investors who want to find an investment property in Dallas, Texas.
Awesome. That's great. And so a part of, I guess, you're working with the Section 8 or the housing voucher program. I mean, how is that just overall in health right now? Is that like, has there been like an uptick, or what is the need for the low income housing?
Yeah, good question. So the low income housing, unfortunate. I mean, it's kind of like it's unfortunate that we have this need in our society, right? But it's a really great thing to see that there are really meaningful programs that help tenants with their housing. And by the way, the HCV, the House Choice Voucher Program, is just one program that is federally sponsored by HUD and locally by Dallas County.
Mhm.
But they have other programs, like, for example, they assist first-time buyers that are, low income, and so they get them into these houses. What is really great about it is that it existed for about 80 years, and they have not once missed a payment. So going back to that COVID time, here in Seattle or some other places around the state, Seattle wasn't very unique in that. Tenants were having difficulties paying rents, and you always have that risk, obviously, when you rent out in the regular market. That risk is diminished when you go through the housing choice voucher because it is already funded. I've never missed a payment basically when I had a tenant in the house and all of that. And then
Yep.
finally, in terms of the profile of the tenants, honestly, based on my experience, they're mostly hardworking people that are just below the poverty line based on their income. Oftentimes, it's a single parent with children.
Mhm.
And we can get into that a little bit, but the way the system works down there is that they tend to pay higher HCV values in suburbs and kind of like places with great schools and suburban areas. So the profile of the properties that we look at, we can take a look at a couple of them today, are ones that are in suburbs with good schools. And once the family is in there and the kids get into the school, they tend to not want to leave because, first of all, there's a big, to your question, there's a big wait list for vouchers right now. There's always a need. It's basically the bottleneck is funding. It's always been that way. So the more funding comes in, the more vouchers are available. But unfortunately, we have this need of people, needing help with housing. And so a lot of questions, by the way, that I get from some investors is now with the new administration, what is going to be the impact on some of these federally funded programs? And frankly, with the last bill that passed in mid-March, the funding has remained flat year over year. So at least we know we're getting funding now. And in the past, as we look at history, these programs have always had bipartisan support. So it's, oftentimes these are states that are, red states, they need the help. And so our administrations in the past have always kind of supported that from a bipartisan perspective. So this year is kind of the first years that we're seeing it flat year over year, but the demand is certainly there, and tenants are always wanting houses. Now, what has happened is we've seen some diversification in terms of demand, some higher, the way the vouchers work are per bedrooms, right? You get a 3-bedroom voucher, a 4-bedroom voucher, and whatnot, and that kind of defines our class. But what we've seen is people getting lower bedroom vouchers. So if in the past a family, a single parent with 2 kids would get a 3-bedroom voucher, if the 2 kids now are of the same sex and age, then they're expected to share a room. So now we've seen a downward pressure on the number of vouchers, and as a result, just fewer people with the higher voucher numbers. It's still a very lucrative business, though.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then that makes sense. Should we dive into some of the just overall numbers of, I know you prepared
Yeah.
some.
I was going to talk just very briefly about Dallas versus other high-level metropolitans. And the big story here is that Dallas, from a property value perspective, relative to the average rent that you can get for the same property, is favorable versus other cities. So the way to look at this is the blue bars are basically average single-family homes. You'll see Dallas is an average of about $307,000, whereas the average rent is the bar below that, and at Dallas it's 2268, reaching a ratio of 11.3. So the lower the ratio, the better. So as you compare it to a place like Seattle, for example, and Ash, I should have pulled Arizona. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but I'm sorry, I forgot about that. But as you look at Seattle, for example, the ratio goes up to 16.5 because average single family home is to the tune of about 870,000, at least over the last year. And so, additionally, what I really like about Dallas is that it's a pretty stable metropolitan. So, first of all, it's one of the biggest cities in the United States, as we know. I believe it ranks in the top 5 or top 6 in terms of size of metro. And by the way, whenever I talk about Dallas, I talk about the metro area. So think Seattle, Tacoma, Dallas, Fort Worth, and all the suburbs around it. Has displayed a consistent population growth of the last over the last 5 years, and also relative to other cities. So if you recall in the previous slide, we saw Chicago slightly more favorable from a own to rent ratio. Well, actually, from a population growth, it's experienced a negative growth over the last 5 years. Similarly, as you look at property values, which, as we know, is the other input for our ROI for an investment property, we've seen a consistent growth of about 7% for Dallas over the last 5 years. And it's true, some of the other metros, like, for example, Atlanta, has grown more in property values. But what I like about Dallas is its stability, right? This is a large, diversified metroplex. And in all of my assumptions, I put in roughly about 3% conservatively for property value increases. And Dallas, and yes, over the last 5 years, we have had COVID impact as well in these numbers, but Dallas has consistently shown those numbers. And then
Mhm.
finally, I want to touch about the landlord friendliness, which is the non-monetary aspect of this investment. So maybe here you can help me, Ash, because you're probably a lot more familiar with the Seattle properties than I am. I by the way have sold my Seattle properties and have moved the money over to Texas, unfortunately, because I love Seattle. It's where I live. I believe in a lot of the programs, but from a landlord perspective, and I understand why Seattle is doing this to protect people. It's just not as friendly as Texas is. This is just objective facts, right? So when it comes to eviction, in Dallas, and I'll we can touch on eviction when it comes to housing tenants. Oftentimes, you don't actually have to get there because you can work with their program and them to come up with a good solution. But here you get a 3 day notice, and Ash, I think it's 14 day notice at least for the tenant in Seattle.
Yeah, or 30. So if
Or
your loan actually as a landlord is federally backed by Fannie
oh
Mae,
wow.
it actually is a 30-day notice. So
Right. And then obviously then you get to the courts and by the time you get a writ and all of those aspects, it's we never want to get to eviction when we are investment property owners. Frankly, that's the last resort. But if you need that tool, it's there. Now, in terms of rent increases, there's a 30-day notice with Texas. There is no rent control, so you can increase the rent by as much as you want. That said, when you rent through the Section 8 program, the rent increase does take a different process. We go through the housing authority for that, but we always ask for the max increase. I understand that in Washington, the situation's different.
yeah, so we have to give 180 days notice. In Washington specifically, we have to issue the lease renewals out on the 60 to 90-day mark, and then a tenant has 30 days to sign after that. If you're increasing it more than 10%, then basically there's a whole nother onset of things that you have to look for. We won't go through it all today,
Yeah.
but basically if it's in a you could be responsible as a landlord for relocation assistance, which I see this is on here too, if you're raising it more than that 10%, and it just depends on the tenant's income to what the rent is. Yeah, there's a whole a whole layer there.
It's fascinating to
It's
me.
complicated. There's a lot of steps, and there actually is on the table a rent control bill that they're talking now in the Senate that I think actually today they'll be in session about. So there'll be an update next week, I'm sure, on that. But that's a statewide proposal, and so
And
we'll
my understanding is that Oregon already legislated something similar as a statewide rent control, right? Yeah. Okay. Non-renewal is one of the things that I've learned about in the last couple of weeks when I met with another investor who's interested in Dallas and has a few properties in Washington State. She was telling me, maybe you can tell me a little bit more about this, Ash, if we have time. At the end of the lease, it sounds like in Washington State, it has to go month to month, and you can't, and you need just cause to not renew it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the tenant has the ability to say, no, I want to go month to month. You have to have just cause for, giving notice. And that would be like a owner moving back in the property, an owner selling the property.
Right.
Or if there was rent that was paid late during the term and there were, notices and like all the things that were served properly, that would be considered just cause. But basically, when you have a tenant that moves into your property, it's assumed that they could live there for many, many, many years unless any of those factors occur. So there can't be any retaliatory behavior increasing the rent, above kind of market standards. There's they do have the ability to go month to month, like you said, as well. Most of
Right.
our tenants, we do find, they want the security of being on a lease to know that they're locked in as well. And so we generally push our tenants, and our tenants like to be on that year terms, but every once in a while, the law's the
Yeah.
law. Yep.
That for that does not exist in Texas. So a lease is a lease. At the end of the lease, you as the landlord and you as the tenant, it's almost like, at will employment. Both parties have the ability to say, the lease is done. I choose not to renew it anymore. And so you have to move out. Right now, I want to say and predicate, I'm coming off as a little heartless with this slide, and I don't want that to be the case. I believe in creating beautiful and well-maintained living spaces for your tenants because that is the best way long term to make your numbers mean, to trend positively mean well, because the biggest cost that you have as a landlord, and I'm sure, folks on the call that have owned property before know that it's vacancy and the make ready that you do in between tenants is what drives the highest cost for you as an investment property owner. And so I love meeting my tenants. I love treating them with respect. They always tell me that that is oftentimes the reason why they're staying in the property. Whereas with Section 8, you do have landlords, unfortunately, that just don't care as much. And that's the people that get the vacancy. So these are landlord friendly regulations that are there for you as an added reason, but not as a reason to invest, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, I
So
like it.
let's take a look at, so we talked about that. We talked about the Dallas Housing Authority. So I'll skip through these. I wanted to showcase a couple of properties, and then I'll stop presenting and we could wrap it up with a couple questions, if that makes sense. So these are actual numbers, actual properties that we've recently purchased for SolMidas customers. So this is the first one. This is a gorgeous, I mean, I would live there, 2022 built home, so really new. And this is partly why I like Dallas. The relative age of properties in Dallas is new. So last 10, 15 years is typically the profile of houses that we look at. It is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath in Fort Worth. It was listed for $299. We ended up getting it for $290. And it was on the market for 56 days. So that is relatively the trend that we're seeing in Texas. Things, at least over the winter, have been on the market for a while. I just pulled the numbers for March, and and days on market had gone down by 10 days. So we are seeing the market heating up a little bit, and closing price to listing price has narrowed the gap a little bit. So there's a little bit less room for buyers. But anyway, this is located in Fort Worth. It's located in a subdivision, which is part of an HOA. We always make sure that the HOA does not have rental restrictions on them, because that's a very important aspect for us to look at. So you can see, beautiful house, comes with everything. I think the owner had to buy a fridge for this one. And then just looking at the numbers for this one. So this is really the money slide, pun unintended. So the maximum rent that you can get in this area is, for a 4-bedroom, is about $3,500. Contrast that with regular market rate of about $2,500. So in this particular case, as I mentioned, really our expectation is 10 to 15% above market rates. In this particular case, we were able to get the maximums just because it's a brand new house. It's a really nice property. And the housing authority evaluated it as such. So we're getting $3,500 in rent. Property taxes are slightly higher, much like Washington State. Texas is a no income state tax. So as you know, they make up the difference on property taxes and other taxes that are, around us. And so we allocate about $616 per month on property tax. Then home insurance about $200. HOA is $35. And then if you choose to have your property managed by the property management team, you don't have to, but obviously if you're a remote investor, you want that to happen. That's to the tune of about 8%, so $280 a month. I have an allocation here for maintenance. The allocation for maintenance is relatively lower because we are talking about a new house. Hopefully we won't have to change any large components like HVAC or water heater or anything like that. But I've allocated about half a month a year for this one. And then that gets us to a net operating income of about 2.2. Okay. Then your mortgage is at $1,500, and this is at today's rates. And that, by the way, you see the size of that bucket. Let's assume that in a year interest rates go down by a couple points. That will shrink to about 1,100 or so. So that immediately flows into your cash flow right there and then. I take a consideration of vacancy of 1 month every 2 years, and then a leasing fee because we do have to pay the property management money to find a tenant for that, which leaves us with a gross income of about $457. So this house is cash flowing from day one, and the owner is super pleased. As you look at the average cash on cash, that's about 8% return. And as you take into consideration both the equity buildup from the mortgage as well as the 3% increase in property value, you're looking at about 24.5% return on that initial 25% investment, because you don't actually need to put down the 290,000. You buy it with a mortgage of about 25% down. So on that investment, that is what the numbers look like.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
going to ask. How much are you putting down for these? And it sounds like it's because it's an investor loan, right? It would have to be between 20 and 25%.
Yeah, that's correct. And so the rates are slightly less favorable for an investor rate, but investor loan versus a primary, as folks probably know, to the tune of about half a point.
Mhm.
But there's also some really interesting products out there like DSCR mortgages, which are strictly based on rent. And in the past, those folks were not able to take the Section 8 rent, the 3,500 in this case, but only the
Mhm.
market rate at 24. Well, I've now partnered with an additional mortgage lender who is able to do that. So he's familiar with the Section 8 program, and he's his partners are willing to take that, which is great because this person's mortgage, including everything, so including property tax, insurance, and everything, is 2,100. So on a
Mhm.
regular month, she's making about $1,200 a month off of this. Of course, there's allocation for future maintenance and vacancies, but those are just the numbers. I mean, she's clearing about $1,000 a month on this, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And just another really quick example, and I've selected a couple of the newer homes. We also deal with slightly older, like early 2000s homes, but once again, a beautiful home. This is in an area called Josephine. It's a suburb outside of Dallas. The housing authority pays about $3,700 a month there as the 4-bedroom voucher, but that includes utilities. So you bring it down to about 31, 32. And in this particular case, we looked at 3150 as the average rent. Similar numbers across property taxes and insurance and HOA. A lot of the new builds are in HOA in Texas. And in this particular case, because the home itself is 260,000, so you're putting less down, the actual ROI looks better. So
Yeah.
once again, another nice cash flowing property. And yeah, we can talk about any kind of questions or anything like that.
Yeah. So I guess your process is for those who are looking at potentially kind of just gathering more information. You have, in all the different areas that surround Dallas, you have what the housing authority offers, and you'll walk them through that whole thing.
Yep. That's
Yep.
correct. This is all public information, and I'm happy to share the links after the call as well. But the Dallas Housing Authority shares payment standards, and their payment standards are based on bedroom and zip code. So they actually don't care if it's a 2,000 square foot house or a 1,600 square foot house. They will pay the same for both. So
Okay.
that for us as investors leads us to a category of homes where they're relatively smaller, they're relatively less desirable by primary homeowners because it just doesn't have that square footage. But housing authority doesn't care. People do care, like the tenants do care. We're not specifically selecting like a super tiny house. I've had 3 bedrooms for 900 square feet that would probably yield relatively the same rents, but I also know they're less desirable. So there's a sweet spot in the category of properties that we look at. And I always try to educate the folks that work with me on here's how the housing authority pays so that it's never a surprise. Of
Yep. And you also want to look to the future as far as resale value and to make sure you're
course.
not, buying something that is not desirable to a buyer when you go to sell.
100%. Yeah. And by the way I look at it is these are long-term investments. I plan on holding them for 10 to 15 years or until, they stop yielding cash flow. They become too old or I need to do renovations. Maybe that's the right time to sell. Every
Mhm.
person is different with where they are financially and what they want to achieve. But to your point, yes, we always have to think about the resale value as well. And that also includes the area. Are there new employers coming in? Is there a new build? What's going on in the area and all of that? These are all the considerations that we would take as market experts there to lead you to the right investment.
Do you feel comfortable enough that you could call out some hot spots right now, or just your top three kind of
Totally.
areas?
Yeah. I look at deals every day, so I definitely feel comfortable. So the hottest spot in terms of consistent rents and demand has been Mesquite, Texas, and specifically zip code is 75181. over there, we've seen consistent payments of about, and I own four properties there, frankly. We've seen consistent payments of about 29 to $3,000 on three bedrooms and about 3,500 on four bedrooms. Now, granted, these are not guaranteed. They can come down. It really just depends on budgets of the housing authority, but that has been consistent. The second one that I've seen tremendous amount of growth potential is actually Fort Worth. So that is the secondary city to Dallas. It's not as far as Tacoma is from Seattle, I think. You can get there in about 35 minutes, 40 minutes from Dallas. But Fort Worth in and of itself is its own town. It's got its own set of employers, and there is demand there. I should also mention there are also other housing authorities in addition to the Dallas Housing Authority, like the Fort Worth Housing Authority, that also
Mhm.
supplies vouchers and align on the same rental rates. And then finally, we're looking at external suburbs like Josephine, like Aubrey. These are towns that are outside the perimeter. I own a house in a town by name of Anna, which is about 40 minutes north of Dallas. Surprisingly enough, Section 8 folks want to live in a nice suburban home and are willing to commute. It's not surprising, like that's
Yeah.
great, but like it's surprising that they would be willing to commute that far from what you assume are their work spots because
Mhm.
these are kind of far away from Dallas, but at the same time, there's demand there and the property values are really good.
Yeah, and you have schools and you have so much, I mean, the growth
Right.
around Dallas is just insane.
Insane.
So, yeah, and so I that doesn't surprise me, especially when you kind of talk about new communities and all the amenities that come with new communities. And it's actually really pretty. And yeah, I could definitely see why someone would want to maybe be out of the city of the metro area and be more of kind of a suburb landscape.
Totally. Yeah. And I will say as we I know we have to wrap this up soon, but I'll touch just a tiny bit on the risks as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, because landlords are catching up and are providing nice housing solutions, tenants have become a little bit picky as well. So for example, I've got a three-bedroom, one and a half bath. And so that became a little bit less desirable for tenants because they're like, I want two full bathrooms. My voucher gets me that somewhere else, or I can go get a newer house for that matter. So there is
Right.
this slight pressure on properties to stay nice, which I think is important. But also, I'm considering now expanding that bathroom to a full bath so that it remains competitive. There is the risk of vacancy, of course, just as you have a risk with everything else. That primarily is impacted by seasonality. So we've seen people that have purchased in the winter and they have gotten a house for about $15,000 less are standing empty for a few months because they're so driven by the school system on this one. So
Yeah.
those are,
I
and
mean,
then obviously there's always the risk of rents not being at the rates that we've seen. They can come down to that plus 10% value, and then I think you as an investor need to also model what does it look like if I rent this out in the regular market, not through Section 8, and making sure that the numbers work. In particular, in the example that we saw, she bought a house for 290 and the regular rent was 24, 25. So she was also okay with those numbers. Obviously, she's ecstatic with the 34, 35, but the numbers, we got to pick properties where the numbers work in the worst case scenario as well.
yeah. And so the process of, let's say you purchase the house, the
Right.
process obviously, when you get you're in the voucher program, is there like a month or 2 months, or what does that process look like? How
Yeah,
quickly?
so yeah, it really depends on the season and the
Okay.
profile of the house. But let's assume you find a tenant within 2, 3 weeks. It takes about call it a month to process their documentation, not on our end, more on the housing authority end, and that's just it's a government agency. It takes time. Um, and then and that includes a background check and application from the tenant. Then the housing authority does their thing with regards to rent reasonableness. They'll come out and inspect the property. We know what they're looking for. There's a certain set of requirements that we furnish the house with in terms of locks, smoke detectors, and stuff. Pretty basic things, but we know what they're looking for in their inspections. So we prepare the house as a Section 8 house before. Nothing major typically. Once they pass the inspection, then we do the rent reasonableness, which the housing authority does. So they determine how much rent they would be willing to pay for that specific house. And then the tenant moves in. There may be a delay of about a month until you start getting your rent, but maybe on your second month, you'll get 2 months worth of just until they kind of set up the payment. So the payments will come. They just might be delayed about a month or so.
But yeah, I think that that is a great overview. And so this year, do you have a goal in which you're looking to acquire more properties, or you kind of just roll as you see them?
Yeah, I would actually love to. I'm sort of, waiting on a little bit more cash on my end before I can. But from my perspective, I would continue purchasing within the Dallas area. For as I said, I have properties in other states, and they're just not performing as well as Dallas. They're fine, and I like the fact that my portfolio is diversified. But Dallas would be the place where I would purchase. My goal for SolMidas is to do about 3 to 5 houses per month. So that is sort of my personal goal. That's why I like it. I'm not a factory. I like to keep it boutique, and I keep very personal relationships with my investors. I'd like to know what they are looking for, and I want to make sure that they're happy.
Yeah.
So that allows me to provide the personal attention for anyone's tailoring, basically.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know when we met, I was very overzealous and was like, by first quarter, I'm going to have my first house in Dallas, but here we are. But you got sidetracked a little bit by New York. So
It's
now I think
okay.
I'm just focused, yeah, focus a little bit more, rein it in. But I do believe in that strategy and diversification. And if you were truly going to be in real estate or investing your money in real estate, not kind of an accidental landlord situation, but you're actually seeking opportunity, you do have to be diversified and being in multiple states, but also not just being in multiple states, working with someone or understanding, taking the time to really dive in and figure out what is going to make you the most on your return, because at the end of the day, that really matters, or is the
Yeah.
number one thing that matters. So you kind of have to align yourself definitely with people that are going to be advocating for you and giving you the skinny on what's going on. So.
Yeah, and we do have that local team in Dallas. I live in Seattle, but I'm in Dallas actually next week. But I go down once every other month or so. So if any potential investor wants to actually see, like, get on the ground and see the properties, Dallas is a very easy place to travel into. It's pretty inexpensive. So we're always happy to meet you down there and kind of tour in person. You don't have to do this virtually if you don't feel comfortable doing so.
Good. Well, I don't think we have any questions here, but we will be reposting this and putting all your information out there. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to Isaac directly or myself. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And then maybe you'll be expanding to other states for this offering,
I
right?
would love to. I've got a few certain ideas, so it'd be great. I
Let's do
love what I
something in
do.
Arizona.
Let's do it. I'd be happy to.
That's great. Perfect. Well,
Awesome.
thank you, Isaac.
Thank you so much, Ash. Have a great Friday, and I really appreciate the honor of being here with you. Thank you for letting me showcase this. I really appreciate you. And I will say once again, you are the hardest working person I know, and I look up to you. So thank you.
You're so sweet. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited about this for you, and I think you're so smart.
Thanks. All right. Well, have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.